Well, thanks very much, Ayanda. And every day at this hour, we take a look at the political landscape, both here at home and abroad, tracking all of the big political stories that you need to know about with some fresh analysis from our experts. And in fact, this morning's political focus is Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga's briefing on plans to reopen schools. Now, to take a good look at this, we now talk to renowned education professor Jonathan Jansen. He has some strong opinions on the impact of the lockdown that it's had on the 2020 school year, and he joins us now via our Skype line. Professor, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM Report. I want to ask you, just as an introduction to our interview, before we get into the topic of the interview and the 2020 academic year, the President's address to the nation last year, your take on what the President had to say?
Well, whatever the President said in the two sonas past, it's very clear that it's redundant. You know, for example, the focus on robotics and learning for education, completely irrelevant. What we now need to do is to figure out how to get high-quality learning materials to 80% of the kids, that is, those who are not able to access online learning from their schools. So we're in completely new territory. Absolutely, we are.
And I mean, for the duration now of the 2020 academic year, you're suggesting that we may have already lost 2020 in terms of academia, but there is a lot of opinion that perhaps we should rather go back to school, in fact, even take the foundation phases back to school, not least because it's difficult for parents who need to be at work to care for and homeschool their children. What's your take on let's reopen, let's get the kids back into class?
Look, let me be blunt. Do you want a kid who is very ill or even dead, or do you want a healthy kid open to learning? And there is no way in which any country can open its schools this year without the risk of infection. Children are vectors. Without teachers, for example, and workers at schools, you know, the caretakers, the people we don't talk about, all not only going to school and risking infection, but going back home in the evening and infecting others. This is going to trigger, my prediction is, if the minister opens prematurely, it is going to cause in parts of our schools an absolute crisis. And by the way, when that happens, you panic the whole school system. Because remember, you know, you only got one child or two children. You can't have them forever. And so if you listen to Dr. Fauci, for example, in the United States, who is the world expert on infectious diseases, he's made it very clear, don't open the schools in that country, nor should we.
So what does that mean then for our matrics, for example? I'm sure, you know, parents of matric students this year are thinking, how do we salvage the school year? What does this mean for my child's future, for perhaps going to university next year?
Okay, so just let's talk about grades 1 to 11. We already have in policy something called automatic promotion. This is not something new. We do it every year for kids who fail a grade in a phase more than once. Pass every one of those kids and make it up in a combined curriculum for the grade in 2021. Then for the grade 12s, as I've said several times this past few weeks, you know, many of them who are going to university have already been provisionally accepted on the basis of their June 20 results from last year.
Yeah.
Ask the universities to take them anyway, regardless, and then work out a bridging curriculum, maybe opening the universities a month earlier, which is possible, and say, if you're doing a BCom, for example, what are the economics or accounting courses that you still need to do, given that we close the school year? So these are completely salvageable from a curriculum planning perspective for both, you know, pre-grade 12 as well as the matriculants. This can be done. By the way, it's been done before. You know, World War II, they closed schools for many months. World War I, any major disaster can close schools down. It should be within our imagination. My big fear, my biggest fear, is that the government is still in the mode of, oh, we've had a few weeks or months that we lost because of a teacher strike. Let's just get everybody back to school, you know, and cramp an already crowded curriculum into their heads. my gosh, that would be so disastrous, not only because it's impossible from a time point of view, but also because we will have to attend to the emotional, psychological, and other kinds of distresses that anxious teachers and learners will confront.
No, absolutely. But what about issues, Professor, like, children? We know that so many children depend on that school breakfast and that school lunch. That for many children is where they get their only meals of the day. I mean, this is uncharted territory for government in so many ways, and there are so many different touch points for various issues. But what do we do about those children whose well-being actually increases when they are in the school environment?
No, those are hard questions, and I have been involved, for example, in raising funding for children who are not able to access school nutrition on their school sites with social distancing and what have you. So clearly you'll have to create a social net, okay, that allows for children to be taken care of, children to be fed within the context of their nearby school. Those are very, very important questions, and others as well that must be addressed. And by the way, let me just say this. This is one of the reasons why you're seeing this very heavy-handed authoritarian approach from government officials, police, and so on, is because they don't have on that National Command Council people who are anthropologists who can advise them on social distancing, people and mourning, people on sociologists, who can advise them on informal dwellings, spiritual leaders that can advise them on the flattened human spirit. So absolutely, we have to deal with all of those issues that you cannot simply take care of by leaving children at home.
I mean, Professor, it's very true what you say about, the dysfunction that this has exposed, the coronavirus has exposed across our society, not least in education. It's only exposed that these challenges are not new. Do you reckon, once we've come to grips as a country, as the world, come to grips with COVID-19, but especially as South Africa, that now that these things have been exposed, we'll find a way now to properly deal with the kinds of challenges and inequalities that exist in our country?
Look, you're absolutely correct, and that's what should happen. I have a huge respect for historians, and I've been reading a lot on people who study pandemics and epidemics from the past. And one of the things, sadly, they tell us is that when you reopen, there is an incredible amount of amnesia, that is visited. They just forget. And you're right. I mean, we're going to have to ask, what kind of economy do we need? Given what just happened, what kind of education system do we need given? And by the way, what kind of environment do we need given that, the climate scientists must be sitting there shaking their heads saying, we warned you, that this thing didn't just happen because a virus, came from some part of the world. This thing happened because our entire planet is compromised by recklessness when it comes to environmental health. So you're right. All of those things need to be on the table, because if we're simply going to reset and forget what just happened, the next time a pandemic hits us, and the epidemiologists are right, this can happen again, then we are going to be in very serious trouble.
No, absolutely. And we know all about that convenient amnesia if we think about just thinking of our apartheid history. Thanks very much for that incredible perspective there. Professor Jonathan Jansen, live to us via our Skype line as we anticipate exactly what the Basic Education Minister will say a little later on today with regard to the 2020 academic year.